Alright, what's going on, everybody? It's been a minute. There's just nothing to react to. I think I'm going to start maybe going onto TikTok and debating. That might be a way to get some content. My last two videos did pretty well, and I had some people reach out to debate, but every single one of them ended correspondence. Prior to establishing, a debate, people on the far right, they're just not really open to dialogue. They're willing to, rant in the comments, but that's about it. And, I can only do so much back and forth in the comments. But again, any far right people out there who want to defend your ideas, I'm always open to debate. My Twitter is in the description. You can DM me there. My Discord handle is the same as my YouTube handle. So reach out if you want. But today we're going to be reacting to a little bit of Jared Taylor. I've reacted to him before. He's a far right guy. He's like an old school guy, though. He's been in this space for quite a while, and he's having a discussion here with some guy I don't know. Honestly, I just sat on Twitter until I could find something to react to. But we're going to react to just a part of this where they discuss racial supremacy, particularly white supremacy, as well as some notions of an ethnostate. My basic task in this video is going to be to demonstrate the idealism that is latent in Taylor's thought and really all far-right people's thought. And my thing is, if you are someone who is on the far right and if you do espouse these beliefs, I really just want you to sit with the fact that I think there's a strong case to be made for this view that ethnostates cannot exist in any long-term position independently, right? They're either going to have to be parasitic, in which they latch onto some larger diverse empire, or they will simply have external wills imposed on them by stronger parties. And so a lot of these beliefs, a lot of the things that they want, remigration, the establishment of a white homeland, so on and so forth, I mean, it's basically just race communism. And I think that is that's pretty damning. And if you do believe these things, just sit with that and ask yourself if you're willing to cling to an idea or an ideology that may never be able to instantiate itself. And if you are, then fine, but be willing to face that possibility. If you're familiar with Plato's summum bonum, his magnum opus is the Republic. And in the Republic, he pitches an idealized republic, an idealized polity. And, it's a tripartite society, which reflects the tripartite nature of the soul. There's a philosopher king. And some say that it is meant purely as a thought experiment. I don't think that's the case. I think that he actually did have, animus towards democracy, and he did dream of something better. Now, I don't think he was so naive as to ever think that the Republic per se was a possibility, but he clearly thought that something like that could be approximated and that could be held as an ideal. However, if you read The Laws, a later work of his, he comes to confront the possibility that it's not possible to implement this society. It's either The Laws or another one of his dialogues, but he says, it's one of his later dialogues, he says that even a state so framed cannot refrain from being shaken. And, I'm paraphrasing here, but as with everything, it will eventually come to pass. Sheldon Wallen makes this point. For Plato, the world exists in a permanent cycle of creation and decay. And so even someone like Plato was willing to confront the possibility that everything that he had conceived of was idealism and was impossible. And in doing so, he rendered his life's work unable to be instantiated in reality, which is a move that shows an intellectual openness that should be commended. It's not to say that his work isn't utile. It certainly is, and we can derive a lot of meaning from it. But it is to say that the man himself eventually confronted the reality, which is that his vision was ultimately idealistic. But, without further ado, let's get into this video and let's hear their beliefs.
Now, you already refer to the mainstream media, and I suspect you spend a lot of your time defending yourself against attacks from the mainstream media, the descriptions of you that they give. In fact, I think if anybody were to search your name, they would find all manner of articles and accusations and labels that are applied to you. Uh, why do they do this, and what how much of it is true, and how?
Well, excuse me again. Well, my Wikipedia article, the very first sentence says that I'm a white supremacist. This is just presented as absolute indisputable fact. While I've never considered myself a white supremacist, I've never met anyone that I would call a white supremacist. To me, a white supremacist is someone who wants to rule over people of other races. And that is a historical term. Yes.
That's all fine and well that you have an idiosyncratic definition of white supremacist, but very clearly, when most people use the term white supremacist, they're referring to the belief that is held by some people that white people are superior with regard to many metrics that matter, and that superiority comes from their genes, right? It's not something that is cultivated by an environment. So, you can define it any way you want. It doesn't change the intersubjective notion that exists in society. This is sort of the same issue that I have with left wingers. In their arguments surrounding trans people, you can come up with a coherent notion of woman that includes trans women and says that they're the same because of all of the formulated definitions. But most people who are straight men are not willing to date a trans woman, and they're also not willing to allow them to compete in cis women's sports. And as such, there is an implicit distinction that doesn't really make sense if they are women. And so when people do this, when they formulate language in an idiosyncratic way, I don't think it accomplishes the end that they want. It doesn't make their ideology stronger. It doesn't push their ideas. It really just cuts them off from the common dialogue. We should aim to understand how people use language. We shouldn't, come up with these personal notions of words. Sometimes that can be utile, but I think here he very clearly understands that when people call him white supremacist, it's because he believes in race realism. He believes that white people are genetically more intelligent than black people or Hispanic people, and that's a belief that he would not be able to defend under scrutiny. And so to me, it's like a diversion. It's a pivot. So I just wanted to point that out.
The British and the French and Spanish, who established their colonial empires, they did wish to rule over people of other races. They had various economic interests, but at the same time, they believed that they were bringing civilization, they were bringing Christianity, salvation to people of different races. And if you look at the British Empire, for example, with any kind of objectivity, you can see that, well, yes, in some respects, it certainly benefited the metropolitan country, but it brought tremendous benefits to the colonized countries.
These people often present their historical arguments as though, they have an infallible interpretation of history, when really it's very unorthodox. It's true that there were currents of thought, even prominent currents of thought sometimes, that existed to supply fuel for the notion that they believed they were civilizing the world, and in doing so, bringing about some good. For example, when the British decided to finally, really pursue the New World, one of their goals was to spread Protestantism and to win over, the natives that existed there, and in doing so, combat Spain both politically and religiously, and because these other cultures were spreading Catholicism, and so there is some truth to that, but at the same time, that's not the whole picture. Very clearly, these idealistic notions quickly gave way to a more brutal and imperial regime where the British aimed to subject the peoples of the Americas to really brutal conditions as a means to secure their own financial ends. And they not only did this to the natives and to the African slaves, but to the British colonists themselves. I mean, there's a reason we revolted. It's not to say that they didn't, maybe overplay the sort of tyranny that existed there, but it is to say that, the American colonists were right that there was a lot of, you could call it tyranny, that was, being employed by the British over the Americans. And so I don't buy the notion that they were benevolent. The slaves obviously existed in very poor conditions. And to say that they were trying to, instill Christianity, then why did they oversee colonies that banned the African slaves from learning to read? You would think if you're wanting to spread Protestantism, a religion which necessitates individual communication with Scripture, you would think you would want them to read. It's almost like by telling them they can't read, you're implicitly admitting that you are not after their religious conversion, but rather their labor. You're after the extraction of the surplus value from their labor, right? To put it in Marxian terms. But yeah, so it's not as simplistic as Taylor wants to make it seem, and his view is certainly not orthodox.
This is not the place to go into that in any detail, but the idea of bringing these less well-instructed peoples under the tutelage of whites and helping them move forward. Yes, you could call that white supremacist. But as I say, I don't know anyone who has that desire today. The people that are in my circle, they want to be left alone. They're white people who want to have societies that reflect their values, where their children and grandchildren can grow up among those values forever. And at the same time, this implies no hostility to other groups at all. I want black people to be the best possible black people they can be. And I don't think that it's good for black people to be living among whites.
You don't want black people to be the best possible black people. You don't want white people to be the best possible white people, because the best possible people in general, which, by the way, if you're saying people, you're referring to the superset, which includes all subsets. And so everything I'm saying applies to every subset within that group. If you want the best possible people, well, then you want the kind of multiracial, diverse empire that we have, because through sheer competition, you get the most competent people producing the best technology, which furthers the human race with regard to things like, I don't really like Elon Musk, but I think it is pretty cool how he wants to, take us into space and colonize Mars and stuff. That's awesome, to become an interplanetary species. And so it's not these regressive white supremacists that want the best possible people. It's people like me. It's the liberals. It's the technocrats. It's the people who want the smartest people in charge doing the work that really matters, that's going to advance the few who are truly brilliant. And in doing so, I hope, and many hope, that everyone can come along, and that it's not just the best. But the point is that a system of meritocracy is one in which the best are elevated. And in doing so, as a species, we have the greatest shot of long-term success. When we were more, I don't think ethno-nationalism has ever really existed, but when we were more ethno-nationalist, things didn't turn out so well. We were stagnant for a very long time. And peoples like the Chinese peoples who have a higher IQ than Europeans, as a consequence of policies that were established around the 16th century, they fared less well in the as we went into modernity, because they closed themselves off to the world. They believed that they had everything that they needed there in China. And it was only with the reforms that came in the 1970s that we really began to see China explode and keep up on the world stage. And, that just speaks to the effectiveness of the liberal policies. And so you don't want the best possible people. That's just a lie. You want a regression back to something primordial, back to something that maybe never even really existed.
And constantly telling themselves that all of their failures are due to the wickedness and evil intentions of people who look like me. What a way to live. But that is what American society essentially tells black people. No, I believe black people should live in a society in which they know that they can rise and fall according to their own exertions and their own abilities. A society in which, if they are arrested for a crime, then they will be handled and tried by people who are like them. I think that white society...
And this has just never existed. It could never exist. These sort of disconnected societies of people where there aren't, causal connections of influence running between the various societies. Because that is what would be necessary from a logical point of view to come to the conclusion that every consequent instantiated in the society is a result of the individuals within that society. In other words, if you have a society of black people and you want to say everything that happens in the society is on you, and then maybe, environment, but we'll ignore that. It's on you insofar as you interact with your environment. You would necessarily have to have that society be completely disconnected from any other society that could possibly exist. And that has never happened. It can never happen. Even prior to modernity, there was cross-cultural exchange, and the boundaries were blurry. They always have been blurry. So, this just, it not only has it never existed, but it can never exist. These sort of racial societies that are disconnected from each other, and they exist in their own little bubble. It's not going to happen.
Society has bent over backwards to a remarkable degree to be fair, even more than fair, to blacks, Hispanics, Asians, any other racial minorities. But you cannot convince black people of this. However, if they really were in a society in which they were responsible for schools, for courts, for every institution, for government, then they would have no excuses. They would know that their society reflected them. It was not something that was constrained by this constant miasma of white supremacy or systemic racism or all of these voodoo-like views that so many blacks and white liberals have about American society. There's somehow there's an atmosphere of even unconscious bias in America that makes blacks and Hispanics in particular to fail. All of that would be gone if they had their own place. And as far as I'm concerned, let them build Wakanda. I want blacks or Hispanics, any other group, to build the best possible society that they can. All I want for white people is to be left alone. And also, when people call me a white supremacist, I've drifted some ways away.
What group of people are left alone? Like, a lot of the times people on the far right, they'll say, why does every other group of people have their own place? Have you seen Japan lately? I mean, they are getting a lot of immigrants. And yes, they're opening up, and it's a purposeful, volitional action. But nevertheless, they're not left alone. China has a ton of different ethnic groups, and they're dealing with their own populations that they deem troublesome, that are ethnically deviant. People aren't migrating to Africa. And, they have tons of... Africa's the most genetically diverse continent on the planet. And so they aren't homogenous. Just because people aren't immigrating there doesn't follow that they're homogenous. Obviously, Latin America, I don't even need to speak to that. That's extremely diverse as a consequence of, the mixing of Spanish, Portuguese, African people with the natives, and so on and so forth. But no group of people is left alone. And they will never be, because people move. And you can't stop that. That's not something that can be stopped. People will always move across borders because borders are human constructs. And, just like we can't change our language to change reality, we can't impose a border and stop someone from walking across it.
Away from this idea, the way that I'm portrayed in the media. Some people would argue that a white supremacist is someone who believes that white people are superior to people of other races. I don't think that white people are superior. I don't think races are in general superior. Races can be different. And if you wanted to talk about superiority or inferiority, East Asians, Japanese, Koreans, Taiwanese, Northern Chinese, Han Chinese, I think it's accurate to argue that probably on average they have higher IQs than Europeans.
What? Why did he say it like it's not obvious? I mean, there is no study that places Europeans above Chinese people in terms of IQ. So that's a weird, blunting of that truth.
They have lower crime rates, lower illegitimacy rates, and not just in their own countries, but here when they mix in the United States. You could argue, if you wished, that they are objectively superior to Europeans. So even if that is the definition of white supremacy, then you'd have to call me a yellow supremacist.
You couldn't argue that they're objectively superior, because the question would be whether those qualities inhere in the people. That's a logical leap. If it's not inherent to the people, then you would have to say that they are operationally superior, but you couldn't say that they as a people are. So again, but it's because he presupposes race realism instead of arguing for it.
This does not mean that I want to be replaced by Asians. I like my people. I like the way they behave. I like the way they look. I like the kind of Faustian approach they've had in history to doing great things. They are my people. They are my extended family. I don't want to be replaced by people even if they are vastly superior. Just as I think probably the people of New Guinea, for heaven's sake. You might say that East Asians are superior to them and to build superior civilizations. Does that mean that New Guineans should be replaced by them? Absolutely not. They have their own society, which they love, which they have the right to preserve. All I'm asking for white people is what I'm.
No one has a right to preserve their society or their culture. I'm sorry, that just doesn't exist. These right-wingers, these far right-wingers, they are just very idealistic. And I don't even know if they know it, but it's like they're just invoking these rights to some static culture. They're talking about some beautiful, idyllic past that never really was accurate, was an accurate picture of any time period. This is all just like, it literally is just like communism. I mean, it's nonsense. I don't even really know what to say. It's laughable. I mean, this guy is, in his 70s? And, with age, you usually get this sort of cynicism, this sort of pessimistic realism with regard to how you view the world, because, you've just seen so much. You've seen so many promises that have fallen through. You've seen so many idealistic regimes that never quite came to be. But this guy just remains naively optimistic and erroneous in his views, even at this age. I mean, I guess good for him, one can hope to be that optimistic at that age. But, when it crosses into being wrong, at that point, I think it becomes issuesome.
Happy, delighted to ensure for every other group. Just let us be who we are without the unwanted interference and absorption of other people who are unlike us. It seems perfectly straightforward and obvious to me.
If I just circle back a little bit to the discussion that we had around Europeans becoming minorities in their own countries, there seems to, there's a lot of discussion about Zimbabwe and South Africa. In particular, you mentioned so the black majorities there run those countries. They are in full control, but
okay, I think we're gonna end it there. They're getting into another topic now, but yeah, that's basically the gist of this. I just wanted to react to these kind of ideas and just say that these ideas of ethnostates, I've spelled it out before, but I'll do it one more time. With expansion, so the growth of any economy or country or nation, whether we're talking about, the land or expanding your economy, that entails diversity in many forms. It entails diversity in the products that you create, because you're now having to appeal to more people with more money. And so more options come about, but it also entails diversity with regard to people, because as you expand, you encompass people who were not encompassed in your prior arrangement. And so it's pretty simple to understand that expansion entails diversity. And as Machiavelli points out, if you are not expanding, you are contracting. And so if you do not want to contract, it necessarily follows that you want to expand. And if you want to expand, it necessarily follows that you need diversity. Now, if you choose to contract, well, then, like I said, now you're running into two problems. Either you will have to parasitically latch on to some other empire which is diverse, in which case you really don't have sovereignty, and you're at the whims, you're subject to the whims of that larger empire, or you're just going to have external wills imposed on you by larger empires. Because when you decide, I'm going to opt out of this pool of labor, this resource, which is the peoples of the world. It sounds messed up, but that's what liberalism and capitalism do. They see the people of the world as a resource. When you opt out of utilizing that resource, you lose out. And so if you are a person who has a mind for power, who sees power dynamics, who wants to win, who wants to survive, who wants to continue, then you will realize that these idealistic worldviews, whether it is communism or this sort of race communism, this ethno-nationalism, whatever you want to call it, you will realize that these ideologies, they just don't work. Because at the end of the day, someone else is going to choose to do the thing you don't want to do, and then you're going to be subject to their whims whenever they become more powerful than you. So that's that. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Twitter, check out my Substack. If anyone wants to debate these ideas, I'm always open. See ya.